Wheel of Genre, the show for readers whose lives are a line of poetry written in a splash of blood. Right now, we are reading every story in Yukio Mishima's Sea of Fertility tetralogy. Oh, that took a while. Including this one, Runaway Horses. I'm Zach, and this week I'm really interested in art imitating life. The line of influence from the life of Mishima to the book that he wrote that we read to the book within the book.
The book within the book. More like a tough trology. Sorry, that was terrible. But I'm Bob. I'm interested in, I guess, what this new character, who we will discuss what he is, who he is, but how he is so different from Kiyoaki from the last book, and yet seems to be extremely similar. There's something about beauty and danger or violence that is tangled up in this book.
Yeah, these two characters are really, really interesting to me because, as I was reading it, I was like, they don't seem to be perfect fits for each other. They don't seem like the real candidate for a reincarnation, aside from just the three moles that you see in the kind of prophetic, I'll see you again under the waterfall or in the spring or whatever it was. But I think that Honda really does a good job of clarifying what exactly it is that gets passed on in reincarnation and the specific element of the soul that we're supposed to see as kind of rhyming between these two lifetimes. But before we get too deep into this book, Bob, catch us up. What happened in here?
Really quick, back to the first book, we have Kiyoaki, our main character in Spring Snow, dies at the very end. And at the very, very beginning of this book, we have Honda, who is now, I think, 38 at the start of this book. He's become a judge. He has met his goals. He was always the more logical one, whereas Kiyoaki was always about emotions, pursuing emotions, even to his own death. And Honda was the responsible one who had to take care of Kiyoaki when he got pneumonia. Honda now is pretty successful. He's got a very stable life. They don't have any kids, but he is a prominent judge. And he gets just invited to go see this kendo match, realizes that it's Inuma, who was the, I guess, kind of tutor and servant to Kiyoaki from Spring Snow. And now he's got his own son. And at this kendo match, he realizes that the most impressive kid out there is Inuma's son. And this kid is just destroying everyone. I think he's only 16 or 17 at this point. Every competitor, he just, dominates, and he wins. And he wins an award for the most outstanding kendo kendo competitor for the entire competition. So he then goes, Honda is really interested to see this kid. There's something strange about him. He is preternaturally confident, preternaturally strong. He seems to be almost godlike. And when he goes to the falls, as you mentioned earlier, after the kendo match, Honda, they're under the falls. They're going to be purified going up to Mount Miwa. And he sees the three moles, and he says, "Oh my God, that's Kiyoaki reincarnated." Of course, he kind of goes back and forth on this and cannot really decide if it's really him, and he's trying to prove it, and he gets weirdly involved in Inuma and his son's life, so much to the point that we'll talk about this more in a minute, but he gets himself into, he has a big plan. He has a big plan, and we could talk about this big plan, but this big plan eventually takes legal counsel. And so when this kid and his friends cannot find a lawyer, Honda steps in, does it for free, and we have kind of a startling end to this book as well. But I think we should, the whole plan that these boys are trying to do is a story on its own.
Before we break down Isao's plot, what do you make of Honda? This is a character who we've seen previously in Spring Snow, and now he's back. He's much older. Do you feel like he's the same character? Do you feel like he's changed in any way? What's the essence of Honda here?
I really like him. He's like in a midlife crisis, 38. Everything's very stable, like we mentioned a minute ago. But he keeps thinking about Kiyoaki, and he's, I know you might want to talk about the dream journals. He is flipping through the dream journals periodically, and he has these ideas of, I am a good judge, I do the right thing. But then there's always this attraction. He kind of has this flame inside of him that he feels like is mostly gone out, might be going out now when he's reaching 40, but something he will see things, and it sparks this spirit of Kiyowaki back inside of him, and he feels like there's a danger thinking about Kiyowaki. He questions himself at one point, and here's a quote from the book. He says, was he really so secure? Whenever the thought occurred to him, Honda had the feeling that long ago a glittering danger had threatened him, a danger that had been destroyed in a final flash of brilliance. And from that moment, he felt he had become invulnerable to any temptation, however compelling, a freedom that he owed to the armor that had encased him ever since. The danger of that distant past and its temptation had been Kiyowaki. So it's interesting to see the kind of lingering spark of Kiyowaki in Honda, even though everything is set.
Yeah, set is a really good word. And it's something I was thinking a lot about with Kiyowaki, because his self-presentation in this book is as a rock. He's a pillar of stone. He doesn't change. He identifies with the law, and as a judge, for example, he talks a lot about how judges are very rational, they're very thoughtful, but they're not very emotional. And this is a point of conflict later in the story as, his relationship with Isao develops and other judges start to being like, oh, has he changed? Has he taken on an element of romanticism? Can we trust Honda anymore?
Right.
Yeah. But it got me thinking, he presents himself as someone who doesn't change. And yet, I do think that he was completely struck by Kiyowaki. Like in the moment of living with Kiyowaki, which is to say, like during the plot and events of the first book, you kind of got this sense of this kind of push-pull relationship with him. It didn't feel like he was that enamored with him, I guess is maybe the word I want to use. And yet for the past 25 years, he has been obsessively thinking about him, thinking about like what it meant to be Kiyowaki, holding up Kiyowaki as a kind of like North Pole, not necessarily one he wants to follow. Well, we could talk about that, but like something that is true, that exists in the world, a kind of higher principle beyond material reality. And I can't help but think that despite what he says about himself, despite his self-presentation, he has deeply changed before this novel starts, and he does deeply change as the novel goes on.
I like this idea of the North Pole, or perhaps a North Star or Morning Star, perhaps. But it feels like he has developed a Kiyowaki complex. He has kind of repressed this idea of being like Kiyowaki, but it's still there. And I think you see it come up in these dream journals. And I know you were interested in this. I wanted to throw a quote at you because he flips through these whenever he has that kind of impulse to, look up at the star, or look inward where Kiyowaki seems to be dwelling within him. But here he picks up the dream journal and he says this: the border between dream and memory had grown indistinct in Honda's mind because the words contained in this journal, his only souvenir of his friend, had been traced there by Kiyowaki's own hand. It had profound significance for Honda. These dreams felt like a handful of gold dust in a winnowing pan, were charged with wonder. So there's something that he's given up, and as his life is so set, I think one great description that Mishima uses to describe the relationship between Rei and Honda, Rei is his wife, he compares them almost to dolls, and dolls are like puppets that are attached by a string. So if one moves this way, the other reacts in the complete opposite reaction as far as a complete equilibrium. So there's no conflict. It's just almost like a cuckoo clock, I guess. Honda's life has become somewhat like a cuckoo clock, and there's that lingering morning star, somewhere in the background or hovering up above overhead.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm reminded of, I remember when I was a kid at grocery store checkouts, you used to be able to buy these little booklets called like Sayings of Nostradamus, and it would be like right next to like the Bigfoot magazine. This was at Fred Meyer, nothing special,
Weekly
but
World
like,
News.
Yeah. Weekly World News. Yeah. I married UFO and he's cheating on me with Bigfoot. But anyways, yeah. So Sayings of Nostradamus, it would be like this little, paper booklet, and it would be like, the prophetic, the prophecies of Nostradamus. But the idea that kind of struck with me was like, you could carry this around, and at a moment of like great importance, do I go left or do I go right? You pull out the sayings of Nostradamus and try to interpret what he said in relation to your current dilemma. I believe the technical term for this is bibliomancy, as in trying to read the future with a book, biblio. Anyways, I feel like what he has done is he has taken Kiyoaki's journal and really turned it into the lens through which he looks out into the world. And I don't mean he necessarily makes every decision by that, but he seems to be constantly looking for signs and symbols that have appeared in Kiyoaki's dreams. And the moments that he lives in his life become all the more meaningful because he recognizes that his old friend had dreamed them first. And there's something that's very validating about his own experience. His life becomes more rich and meaningful because it has the stamp of authenticity of having been pre-dreamed by Kiyoaki.
If their lenses is kind of like They Live, you put them on and you see something out there, except these are like very guilty pleasure lenses.
Yeah.
Taking them down.
Or instead of them being reptiles, you're like, oh my God, it's all one soul being reincarnated again.
Yeah, that's true. Life and death are wearing me out, Kiyoaki. I was reading this. Where I got to find this, Zach? I read a really interesting article about time and how it's presented and how Mishima is using time and how he uses kind of three registers of time or three kind of time frames. That's probably the correct word I should be using. But it's called Mishima's Modernist Treatment of Time and Space in this series. And it's by Sunroku Yoshida from 1983. So this writer is saying that, okay, chronological time in the narrative is built on solid, careful historicity and skillfully combined by Mishima. So it's kind of, a historical novel in a way. But there are three different philosophical concepts of time. And so they lay out this. One, the cyclical time of Buddhist reincarnation, the linear time of Judeo-Christian thought, and the spatial time of the Buddhist school of Uishiki, which is meaning consciousness only. So they also go on to say that the cyclical nature of time experienced by the four main characters in the tetralogy is a literary projection of the Buddhist concept of reincarnation, the mystic transmigration of a consciousness from one human embodiment to another at death, rather than a genealogical transmission as from father to son. So we've been seeing, old friends and then they have sons. That's going to happen, I guess, later in other books too. But there is like a success when something is happening through the reincarnation, and then potentially a failure if that doesn't happen in addition to the genealogical ancestor, having children, that kind of thing. But I was interested, you were saying that it's like Kiyoaki and has seen all of this before, and now Honda is going back and seeing it through the Kiyoaki lens. What do you think about this idea of multiple times kind of being played with? This author also said that there's a spatiality to the time because so many times seem to be recalling one another.
Yeah, I love that. I think there's one aspect of time that's not hit on, which is a kind of absolute time. At one point they talk about in this book the kind of like the tangle of, it's hard to know what's right and wrong to do, the kind of tangle of values in this earthly world. You think, oh, well, if you just watered down your politics, and made them more realistic, if you bent them a little and made them a little bit more flexible, then it would be adapted by more people. And he says, no, like this is the opposite of my politics. My politics are a purity politics. They are a politics that is absolute and cannot bend. And this idea that within this world, there's so many shades of gray. There's so many different ideas of what is good. Everyone understands the idea of the good, but no one understands how to apply the idea of the good in this material world of ours. And yet, that idea of goodness, or what they call here like purity, that kind of absolute tower that rises above this material world that is visible once you leave space and time. And, once you get the God's eye view, you can see the absolute purity. Anyways, my point I'm trying to make is I think that this is a separate register of time that this one author missed out on, which is the kind of God's eye view, the absolute view of purity versus this kind of world of shades of gray.
Oh, that maybe is the Fushiki, which I don't really know what that is, but it's the consciousness only. But maybe not. I think calling it absolute time is going to help us a little bit more since we know what this means. I think this idea of purity and this idea of holding on to tradition and to culture and to the gods is extremely important. And now I think we might get into this idea of the kind of rebellion that Isao is trying to plan. And I think this is, I don't know enough about Japanese history. This is where we're going to get into the weeds, and it's very difficult to talk about because, again, this is a historical fiction novel, but I think it's also extremely important for, I guess, the development of philosophy in Japan through the Meiji Restoration, when there's a huge departure from all sorts of tradition. And I just wanted to point out, I was just in Japan and talking to a store owner about Yukio Mishima, which was great. Cool. And she was like, "You've read, Yukio Mishima? He's so important." So I think he should be recognized as one of the greatest authors of all time. And I think often people will just say, "Oh yeah, he's one of the great authors of Japan." And that's of course true, but also Japan is one of the most powerful, influential countries of all time. And he is a huge author. I was wondering, what do you think about his trying to use these characters and trying to figure out what it looks like to hold on really dearly to that pure idea of we serve the emperor, we are kind of this divine wind. We are almost enacting the god through our actions and through maintaining this culture, versus all of these rules that come up in the novel, that's within this novel. All of these rules of people can no longer have swords, people can no longer act according to these ancient laws that they've had for hundreds of years. Now we need to move on to modernism and depart from the gods in a way. At least that's how it's framed for the rebels. If we leave some of these traditions behind, we are making the gods nothing but little statues that no longer have power. I think that's an important part of this book. It's just a lot to digest.
It's a lot to digest. It's hard to know how that plays out. You know what I mean? It's hard to know what... okay, so I was thinking about it. I was like, okay, let's say they got their way and they returned to a kind of more traditional Japanese society, kind of like a Garden of Eden state of Japanese society. Well, what about all the other countries? Britain still has guns and boats, I don't mean to be like, checkmate, Mishima, because that's not at all what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is it's hard to know exactly, not it's hard to know, but rather I would be very interested in seeing them get what they want and then seeing what challenges arise after that. You know what I mean? If they reinstated the emperor and destroyed the capitalists, what happens next? Because history doesn't stop.
History doesn't stop, and I think that is, again, this kind of idea of time that is spatial, because we have it within this book. There is the book that is called just called the Keishinto Rebellion?
It is called
What's the title?
The League of the Divine Wind by
right.
Tsunenori Yamao.
Okay, so Tsunenori Yamao, and this is a fictional book, but it's based on a real rebellion, which is, the group is called the Keishinto. The rebellion is called the Shinpurin Rebellion, and it's in 1876 in October, and it's described throughout this book that Mishima plops into runaway horses. And this rebellion started all sorts of other rebellions, eventually resulting in the Satsuma Rebellion, which was much, much bigger. But it's interesting that this is being recalled here, and then it's being reenacted by Isao and his friends, essentially. They want to be the same divine wind. They even call their group that. Then they try and pull off a rebellion that is unsuccessful, and it sparks other rebellions that are going to be unsuccessful, and it's a big part of what Mishima wanted to do. Of course, people debate a lot about that. Was he just going insane? Was he just enacting things? I think all of the things are true because anyone can have so many thoughts in one day, but I think he probably did want to try a rebellion, even if he knew it would be unsuccessful. But when he goes, he captures the general, he talks to the army and says, we will no longer take on these Western laws that are going to force us into a new constitution. We are going to depart from that completely and retain the sword and go back to a more fundamental, like Bushido way. I think it's not just history repeating itself. It's like all of these layers, and it's hard to even tell which one happens before the other, which one is influence. And it's almost like the present in this book is just as influential on our understanding of the past, of the real Shinpuran rebellion, as will be later on Mishima's actions before his death.
Yeah, and the book becomes more interesting because of Mishima's actions upon his death. And, it's interesting because you can see the groundwork being laid here, the bricks being laid down into the road for what he's eventually going to do. And I don't know, I was just really struck by the kind of thematic cohesiveness between the book within the book and the book itself, and then what him and his friends did. It was as if he first dreamed up this character of Isao. You know what I mean? Like when you have that kind of spark of inspiration, and he said, this is a character who stands for these certain things. He wants the reinstatement of the emperor. He's willing to stab himself in order to prove a point. And he views life as just, you do your actions and then you die. And what is a belief without an accompanying action to follow it? It's not really a belief after all, as he says in the book. So he dreams up this character, but then he dreams up a kind of precedent for this character, this book within a book. He dreams up a model for these people to influence that character. And then he says, finally, I am this character. This character is me. I am going to live in my life in the way that this character lives, which, as just like a pure side note, makes me really interested in what's going to happen in book 3 and 4, simply because it feels like this could have been the final book. He could have written this, turned it in, and then done his actions at the military base. But we're going to keep going. So I'm curious where it goes from here.
I'm curious too. I was reading, mentioning that he is writing, and then he wants to take things into more action. There's another article that I was reading about, I think when the movie came out, it also features this. I think it features the Golden Pavilion. Oh God, a different book, and then Runaway Horses.
Yeah. Mishima, A Life in 4 Acts.
Yeah, Mishima, A Life in 4 Acts. And so when this came out, there's a New York Times review, I guess like a year after it came out, and the writer is talking about how, he's got dozens and dozens of books. He's extremely successful. He's one of the most famous authors in the world at this point, but he decides that it's not enough. There needs to be action. And he talks in interviews about the sword and how there is the idea of the arts and kind of the crafts of Japan. And the other side is also the sword. And when the sword is taken away, it becomes kind of just a society of decoration. That's what he's afraid of letting happen. And the sword is really important. You were just talking about Isao kind of running to the very end of the book, which becomes quite violent, but he is constantly like checking in his jacket to see if he has his dagger, to see if he's got it there, to see if he still has his sword. Of course, he needs it for a specific purpose, but it's also really important to always have a sword, and that is kind of the final straw in this book during the Shinpuran Rebellion. You take the swords away, what is the point? We don't have anything to defend the old ways anymore. And there is this, here we go. Here's this quote about swords that I think is very central. The sword, therefore, not only maintains the tranquility of the nation, but also guards the safety of the individual citizen. Indeed, the one thing essential to this martial nation that reveres the gods, the one thing never to be put aside, even for an instant, is the sword. And to have the sword also means to protect the gods. When they go into battle in the book, The Divine Wind, the League of the Divine Wind, they have their own general. They have, what's his name? Otaguro. That's right, Tomo Otaguro, the real leader of the real rebellion. But they have him. But they say, more importantly, they also bring this divine simulacrum. They bring like a god into battle, and that will be the secret general dictating where they go. they say that the god whom Otoguro would carry into battle, the divine simulacrum of the war god Hachiman of the Fujisaki Shrine, would be their unseen commander, the one who would mysteriously direct their efforts, and herein would be the fulfillment of their late master's dying wish. So it's important to be kind of the breath of the god. They are truly the divine wind because they are carrying the god forward into battle. And I think the sword, they are afraid if the sword is taken away, again, the gods will become little puppet gods that don't have any power. They just sit there and they don't actually have that divine breath. They are an image. They are a mask.
I'm going to throw something controversial at you, and I want to see what you think of it, because this just came to me. You know, a lot of discussion around this book that we've been seeing, maybe in the Discord or maybe on like made in YouTube videos, things like that. People saying they don't quite feel like they can wrap their hands around this book, wrap their mind around what's at stake here. Losing the sword, losing these old gods, these old values. I feel like the closest comparison that we could make to kind of bring it in everyday terms and translation would be if this character was like a Second Amendment guns rights person.
I didn't think about that. That's funny.
I mean, he's like mad at a world that wants to take away his weapons. You know what I mean? And he's willing to, it's a story that's valorizing this idea of living for a value that doesn't fit in with the modern world anymore, and saying, no, I am going to assassinate. I am going to, attempt a revolution in order to live according to these values and ideals that, that the main character has.
Oh God, yeah, that's okay, so there's many ways to be thinking about this. Either we are just fantasizing about Japan, like, wow, it's so cool to have these Second Amendment guys running around with swords. Man, isn't that cool? But then when you bring it home and you're like, wait a minute,
yeah,
this is almost the same. But I don't know. I wonder if it's just fun. They feel more like ancient Greeks. What's going on? There's such a code of devotion to the gods, not to say that it's necessarily selfish, but I think there's something more egoistic about the Second Amendment and the relationship with the gun. Of course, we say that that's how the West was won, of course, but there seems to be something like, it's my gun. But in the rhetoric here, it's all about this represents the gods. This is to protect the emperor. If we cannot embody the actual, of course, I guess that could be the same argument on either side, but what it seems like is if we cannot embody the gods themselves, the gods will have no bodies and they will just become statues. So it feels like to have, at one point they say it's the fangs and claws, the military is the fangs and claws of the gods. If you take that away, then the gods cease to exist. But of course, you can use the gods as an excuse to do something horrendous. So there's that side as well.
Yeah, I mean, gods are frequently invoked to do something horrendous in, ancient Greece and, throughout history. So, tale as old as time. I guess, for me, what it makes me wonder is like, do I have a sword? You know what I mean? Like, like you said, it's nice to look at this and be like, wow, so, you didn't use this word, but maybe like picturesque. They want to bring back the Code of the Samurai, but it's like, what this book does, I think, is hold up a mirror to ourselves if we let it, and let us ask ourselves, is there Iseo within us? Is there anything that we truly feel like we're living for? Is there anything that we would die for? I don't know. Maybe I feel like for me, it will take some self-reflection to be like, okay, do I have a sword? Where's my sword? Bring me my sword.
Bring me my sword. Sometimes I'd like to say a sword is just a sword. But I wonder, yeah.
Yeah. I thought about that too as I was talking.
I had a feel. Oh no, what direction am I going?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I feel like it's hard to be so devoted to gods that are completely present, and it feels completely different. And even Isao feels different from a lot of the people around him. He's talking to one of the lieutenants who is kind of not really believing what Isao is saying. Isao's like, here's my plan. I'm going to do this, and I will create the perfect death. And he says, well, you never know when you're going to go. That's why we pop flies, as one might say. But he has all of these plans of what will be important, and he's going to carry them out. And a lot of the people that listen are his age. There's one, what do they call them? Like they call one guy, I think his name is Sagawa, and they call him
Sawa,
like the Sawa, the wayward middle-aged guy. And he's the only one in his 40s. Yeah. And then the rest are all 18 and 19 and 20, some of them even younger, actually. They're 16 and 17. And it's similar to Yukio Mishima's militia, who is almost, he's in his 40s, and then all of the kids are pretty much college kids. They're fresh out of college. So there's something completely idealistic, not to say naive, but there's something like, how like when you're a kid, this is completely inappropriate to say, but this idea of believing in like Halloween costumes or believing in monsters or believing in something, but not being able to separate fantasy from reality. And there's something about the youth here, not being able to separate kind of the fanaticism with reality. Not to say it's fantasy from reality, but this idea of, yes, we're going to make this happen. And we, even if it doesn't work, we are going to make a big impact, and that will be very glorious. And of course, it's written here in a novel, so it feels very glorious because it's portrayed very beautifully, just like Kiyoaki's death, even though he seems kind of like just a lovesick idiot, one might say, but it's very beautiful. In spring snow, it's gorgeous. And there's something about Isao's plight that is gorgeous in here too. But if you just read it in the news, you would be like, that kid was a nut.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, okay. So you're bringing us onto a whole new can of worms here, which is kind of the complications that this book brings into this kind of neat tale. So wow, where to even begin to crack this? So at the end of the day, we haven't quite talked about this, but Isao is turned in. He is turned into the police, and he spends a significant portion of the novel in jail. What we come to learn is that it's his father, the old tutor for Kiyoaki, his father, who has turned him in. And the reason he did that is because he could clearly perceive that his son was about to do something great. He was about to do something that would make his life meaningful, that would get him stamped into the history books. To use the words of Mishima, it would make him into a hero. He would do a great act and then he would die. And his father said, that makes me jealous. So his father stepped in and essentially ensured that it wouldn't happen. And what you're talking about with like kids and Halloween costumes, I think that like the childhood adult model is really, really helpful, because what Mishima wants us to see is that Isao is a child. You know what I mean? Like he has only a child could have such a simple view of the universe. The act of becoming adult is the act of recognizing that there are different stakeholders, that there are different values, that not everything you immediately feel is the truth. The truth of the universe. It's a ripening. It's becoming more complex. Think of that Peter Pan movie with Robin Williams. He used to be Peter Pan. Now he's just some schmuck who sells insurance and flies on airplanes or whatever, So the point I wanted to make here is I feel like actually our presentation of this book so far has been in the terms of Isao, has been seeing Isao as Isao presents himself. But actually, what makes Mishima such a great author to me is that you just as clearly get the critique. You just as clearly get the adult perspective coming from the police, coming from his father, coming from his, wife not to be. Lady in waiting, however we want to talk about her, you get even Sawa has a kind of like winking perspective. You know what I mean? He's like in it, but he's like, he clearly sees that it's going to fall apart. Mishima gives us Isao, but he also speaks to us as adults. It's not pure propaganda.
But yet in his life, he comes to embody Isao. He does the same thing. I wonder if he can show I wonder if there's a kind of irony that he knows, as you've just pointed out, that he can show the glory, and that also he can show people how they're going to perceive the glory, and that maybe both are right. I wonder if it's Esau is all about purity, and then potentially his father used to be pure and then became more and more jaded, became more and more impure, and so has lost the true path or has lost the right way. It's hard to say if the people who are older, more mature, and looking at him are so much wiser or are just jaded and can no longer see the truth.
Yeah.
It feels like Esau is on the side of the gods and these other people are on the side of humanity. And again, not to say that it's a naivete, but there's a faith that is present in Esau that seems to be not a lack of faith, just kind of a winking, grinning nod at what the faith used to be.
Yeah. I'm reminded of the old reincarnation bit where it's like the reason why babies cry when they're reborn is a cry of anguish because they can still remember their past life, They're like, not again, not reborn into this mortal coil, but then, over time they slowly forget their past lives and they start off again, completely wiped away of all their old memories. I feel like Isao is a character who understands a fundamental truth and has not forgotten that truth yet. You know what I mean? All the other characters are urging him to bend, be flexible in your leaves, tone it down, just tone it down a little. Those are people whose minds have been bathed in the river Leith. That's one that makes you forget all your memories, right? Leith, yeah. They're all people who have become complacent in this world, and I do think that we see both sides. That's all I'm trying to say. We see both sides. And just because we see both sides doesn't make Isao wrong.
I'm interested to see where it's going to go. If Honda is still alive, Isao, you can read the book, but Honda is still alive. And I'm curious to see, he's so invested in Isao, especially in the trial, he's going to do it for free. But I wonder, is this going to be what he needed? Like, is it buying the sports car and then returning it? Is it going to go back to a kind of sedentary or static life? I've sowed my wild oats, my middle-aged oats, and now I'm going to go back to normal life. I've had my Rumspringa. Or is he going to be enlivened with, even though Kiyoaki and Isao seem very different, some kind of passion, like some sort of extreme passion, before the River Leith, has he been woken up to something that will make him kind of a fanatic or make him is he going to become impassioned? Is his libido going to be revivified to the point he becomes dedicated to a cause, or that he's going to look silly, I guess, in the future books?
Well, he does dedicate himself to a cause in his own way within this book. I do wonder where we can take this, by dropping out of being a judge in order to become a defense lawyer for these, in his own way, that's a very romantic act. You know what I mean? For his character, it's a big step. But yeah, I do wonder, like, what will happen to Honda, and will he just become more and more obsessed? I feel like, he has that great moment in here where he says, I don't see any relationship between the way that Kiyoaki's persona and Isao's persona. I don't see any connection. But then I realized that actually they are two halves of a lotus, one red lotus and one blue lotus, but it's one whole. And what he's trying to say, I think, is that Kiyoaki is someone who is pure in his devotion to love. His purity is being willing to die for the sake of love. Isao, his purity is being able to die for the sake of his political ideals. So we got two more books. Presumably we're going to see two more reincarnations of, this being, this soul. What other kinds of purity exist? I can't even speculate. Maybe I'm just that far outside of Japanese culture, but like, where are we going with this?
I don't know. Something that you just said, though, reminded me of a really important line, a line that I think is very important about when he's trying to figure out how are these two related. This can't be. They'd seem so different. And yet I have this idea that the more divine being or the more essential being within them is the same. He says, the two were as different as light and shadow, but they shared one characteristic. Both of them strikingly personified youth. We had that kind of idealism of Kiyowaki in the first book that we said might be kind of that inability to separate fanaticism from what other people think of as reality. And it's the same for...
personified youth, yes. But remember the character in the previous book, who I believe we will see again, Satoko Ayakura, who left... the material world to go join the monastery. And her particular branch was Yogacara Buddhism, which Honda in the previous book gives us a kind of Cliff Notes version of that Yogacara Buddhism. And I probably should have brushed up on this, but I didn't think we were going to be talking about it today. But the idea is like you have different faculties of the mind, right? They call it like seeds in the storehouse, basically, but the idea is like the ability of perception is just one of your faculties. Your thinking mind is another, your feeling mind is another, your ability to hear, see, taste, these are all just faculties, but there is one element of this that is what passes on after you die. And that is roughly akin to like a Jungian unconscious mind, like a collective unconscious mind is what passes on. So you end up leaving behind all the elements of your personality, your name, your identity, your memories, but it's this kind of seed house, these seeds that have yet to sprout, that have yet to bloom, that gets passed on from one person to another. So I kind of had that vision in the back of my mind. And I think that the kind of youthfulness he's talking about is an element of that, but it's also like, it's that kind of vivaciousness. It's that kind of intensity. That's the word I'm looking for. It's the intensity towards something, towards anything, pointed at different directions. That's what seems to be passed on and on again.
Very intense, libidinal light, just like a non-ending, like a lightsaber that goes on and on. Yes, where's that going to go in the next book? Yeah. I want to say one thing. So I mentioned someone who I was talking to when we were in Japan. I just wanted to mention her store because it's so incredible, and she's a huge Mishima fan, and we had a great conversation about Mishima. And so her store is called Aoi, or AOI, Kyoto Antiques, and she's on Instagram at Kyoto's. Oh my God, Kyoto's Kimonos _Kyoto. Kimonos _Kyoto. She's a great store. And I just want to say, Tama-san, 本当にどうもありがとうございます。私たち very happy. That's the end of my Japanese, Tama-san, because I forgot to study in time. But Tama-san のお店は素晴らしいです。So どうもありがとうございます、Tama-san.
Well, Bob, this was a book, and we got 2 more, and I'm stoked to read them. If it was up to me, we'd just keep reading Mishima, all of them, every one of them.
Oh, he's so good.
Yep. All right. Well, I'll talk to you later, Bob.
I'll see you at the gym.